meet Robert Rice, June. Early last fall, spent many sessions going over there, going through all of this, plus a lot of fun conversation, getting to know one. And these models he built, he spent 40 years, once he left the Army, rebuilding history of his family legacy. And that's why we're here today. It's not me, I take advantage of the work done. So why do we want to talk about? This is a old, when I was working 12 years ago, computer, so let's see how that goes. Come on. There. There we are. So why are we going to do the Rice Brothers? What did they introduce to the peninsula that may be different? Jim Hunt, former person very active here, who wrote the book Iron Men and Wooden Vessels, not the book, but the pamphlet we have here, tells the story of World War II all the way through the peninsula, and Rice Brothers was one of many. So yes, they did build 13 vessels, had over 200 men working, every lobsterman from here before they came and worked in the shipyards during the war. 1926, 120-something foot steel hulled schooner. They introduced steel construction to the peninsula. 1950, they were building light ships for the Coast Guard. So they really, where did it all begin? Well, someone named George Rice came to town. He was born around 1830-ish. He came to town in the 1850s. But look over on the right. You see Jacob Fuller opened the shipyard sometime around 1830. He moved over to the top of Lincoln Bay. His son, Jacob G. Fuller, they built a lot of pre-Nazi schooners like what you're looking at. That's the kind of shop that they were. Well, young man George courts the daughter of Jacob, Elizabeth, and they get married in 1862. So it looks like we're going to have a shipbuilding family. Two of the brothers that we see here, Henry on top and Will below, and a joke we had with Robert is the family doesn't have a young picture of Frank, so we don't have a brother here.
Yeah, you jumped like three. That's good.
So what was East Boothbay like in 1860? Okay, these maps, we have them on the wall in the next room. You can see the map. Boothbay was all one in those days, and you have this neck that extended down the Damascotta River. And the red circle is obviously what we're interested in. It was called Hodgson Mill in those days. And if you look at the blow-up map to the right, you'll see the T shape that's the mill right next to the mill pond, and Hodgson's yard that was there 1820s, and they sold it in 1966. So that's how long that ran. They continued to work, but they were on Murray Hill after. On the south side, you see the Blue Adams yard and the CD yard. That was all one property, the Reed property. It was split off sometime around 1840, and two different families. The Adams shipyard, 100 years. And they built ships, they built four-masted schooners, they did all that sort of stuff.
Jon, orient us a little bit. Is the road going up the center, is that 96?
This is 96 going that way, south of Ocean Point. This is the church today. This is now the park. All right, so this yard became CV. They built masts, they built pumps, and they built several ships. So that wasn't this active in shipyard, but it was very much engaged. And you'll see in the next photograph lots of other things took place. This is pretty much they called Race Point. It was all the Murray property, you know, Murray Hill, Murray this, Murray that. And the Rice bought this point out here. In this area, he was not able to buy for several years because the steamship came in. And if you look at it from the other side, now you're on top of Hodgson looking out to the Damascotta River. Over on the right, you see the Adams Yard, typical of one of their bigger vessels that they built. Here you see the CV yard. This is the sail loft. All kinds of different uses in there. They actually delivered coal there for years, paint shop, all kinds of things took place on that particular block. Far end, this wonderful 1883 photograph. Look at the pot. fish flakes out there on the rocks at Grace Point. That was what was going on in those days. And the little red box shows you on the other side, you see George's house. Here's the end of today's School Street. Here's his house right on the water. And notice he has a shipway coming right out of his basement. Well, you marry the shipbuilder's daughter. You have a bunch of kids. Guess what they're going to do is they're going to want to start building small boats. And they did. And by 1880, son number one, George, went over to South Bristol, met a girl, got married, never came home. Second son, Frank, started working with his dad sometime around 1880, and they were building maybe 20-foot skiffs. And quickly, Frank took over and was building a few larger boats. And the two brothers were next door working with their uncle. Both Henry and Will went over and did complete apprentice program over in the Fuller Shipyard, learning the real business. And they came back, think about it, they're all in their 20s. This is a different age. This is 1890, 1891 and 2. And they said, let's form the Rice Brothers. And very quickly, they're building bigger, bigger, and bigger vessels. This one's kind of sexy. That's Franklin Delano Roosevelt's yacht from Campobello. They built that in 1897. So looking at this cartoon, you see this cartoon map, the three houses, the three brothers, that's where they lived. George's house was still here. This is the shop they built, okay? It's 140 feet by 60 feet, the first shop, 1892. Personality of the brothers start to evolve. Henry was machinist, he was in metal, he was in all kinds of things. So right here, he builds a foundry and machine shop because he says, we've got to build engines. So by 1901, 1902, they're building 4 and 6. They eventually get up to about 28 horsepower engines that they were building. So you could buy a vessel from them, it would come with the engine already in. And that was different. See this launch, this is hole number 22 is in 1901. See the machine shop was the brick building with the shop that they built earlier. Henry, it's all about business and production. And he said, the normal market was you look at a magazine, Rudder magazine, Yachting magazine, you say, oh, that's a nice boat, I want this. You go to a shipyard, you say, can you build me one? So everything was one off, not very efficient. Henry said, that's ridiculous. Here's my catalog. You look in there, you pick which one you want. We're going to have stock build components, parts, so we can mass produce them. Between 1909 and 1913, they built 275 of these things. 275. And see their mahogany runabouts of different sizes. Will was a socialite, I'm told, and loved speed. He was all about speed. And he brought the first automobile to East Boothbay. But being a Rice brother, that's not all he does. Agent for the cars. They open up a car dealership. Now, they didn't last long. As you may know, there's a Mr. Lewis downtown Boothbay Harbor who sort of controlled the automobiles very quickly. But they did it for a little while. It's kind of part of the story. If you look at the yard from the Damerscott River, you see Will in a speedboat going by because that's what he loved to do. And you see the White House with the cupola. That was not there in the 1880 photograph we just saw a few minutes ago. So this is relatively new. Not sure how it got there. There's a house on its left and there's a shed to its right. They knew they'd have to eventually rotate the yard to the north-south direction so they could build bigger vessels. Let's get rid of these houses, and they did. One of them was taken to Ocean Point. They used to put houses on barges in those days. The other one went all the way to Boothbay Harbor. The shed actually went to the CV yard. Remember the gold, yellow-colored yard I showed you? They now own that in 1902, so they moved that over there. That area was cleared up. Now let's look at the same thing from the other side. Steamboats in, that's the Enterprise. She was there over 50 years. Back in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, it was critical because that's how the material came in for all the ship. but they wanted to get rid of it, and it finally disappeared in 1912. These are all the different businesses that are going on. The other thing is, note, someone wrote these names in this photograph. You see Tyler Hodgson. That's one of the brothers of the Hodgson. He ran the lumber mill all the way up until 1942. That's when he died. And one of the Rice brothers bought it from them at that time.
That was the mill on,
That-
mill on Mill Pond.
The mill pond. So right in the middle of World War II, it switched hands. Okay. With all this expansion, tearing houses down, you gotta build engines, you gotta do this, personality of Frank now evolves and he says, you guys are nuts, I'm out. I'm sure I wanna build boats, but I wanna go at a different pace. So after many circular conversations, the CV yard, that yellow yard you saw in the box, was given to him, and that's how they bought him out. So you see in these 4 photographs, here's the shed we showed you a minute ago, moved over there. Here's all the buildings there as they evolved over the next 50 years. He ran a lumberyard, hardware store, he stored boats, he did build vessels. But this property was active. This is his house. I show it to you here because today, that's the office for Washburn and Dow. So that was Frank's house. If you go down to the buildings, this is a guy called John Gordon, who was best friend with Bernard's son. And the son and John took this all over and ran it up until the 1970s. But Frank was no slouch. He didn't just build dinghies now. Look at that 105-foot wooden hull fishing trawler. Between 1895 and around 1910-ish, the trawlers were coming in, European design came to America, and were replacing the schooners. And Frank built this himself. Amazing, that's 1920. But back in 1911, he built one of these called Triton. We've seen many of those around the Maine coast, sardine carriers. But this one's interesting. In this newspaper clipping down here, it says Neptune Packing Company. Well, that's Boothbay Harbor. Used to be Knickerbocker, became Neptune, became Brown Brothers. So up until 1945, that was a fixture of our harbor. Another important part of their business was yacht clubs and race sailboat racing. They maintained a relationship with the John Alden, but more important, B.B. Cronenshield, who designed most of the racing craft that they built. Okay, this is B.B. Cronenshield's private schooner built by Rice Brothers. And in the caption of the photograph, B.B. Cronenshield was sailing with his Parisian sweetheart. Greg Muzzey in the brown shirt apparently lived in Rockland. He built the model. It's right here. And that's him donating it to Robert Rice about 20 years ago. Robert, I'm sure we could look it up. In here along. And what's important about that relationship was, more than 10 times, they successfully would go to the yacht club and say, let me build you a fleet. Get every one of your owners to buy one. I'll build you 10 boats. You want to have match racing? That's match racing. It was successful with this production. They built over 140 sailboats over 20 or 30 years up to about 1920 something. That way, like not onesies and twosies, but selling 10 at a time, 15 at a time. Very, very good business. See the schooner? I think what I've gotten out of this study is if you wanted a yacht schooner, go to Rice Brothers. If you want to go fishing, go to Hodgson. John Alden told Macmillan to go to Hodgson to build boat. That's last year's story. Now, I'm saying from what I found, these yachts coming out of Rice Brothers are really good. Here's more fleets they're selling to yacht boats. 1913, Adventurous was launched, 133 feet. Rich guy came to town, said, I want me a schooner. I'm going to sail to Alaska to catch me a whale. Well, he built the schooner. He sailed it to Alaska, but alas, there's no whale. So what did he do next? He sold it to the San Francisco Pilots Association, and they used it for the next 35 years out of San Francisco, which is very difficult sailing. I'm sure you've seen it, you watch the Last American stuff. And today, it's our equivalent of a windjammer. You could just Google Adventurous. It's in Washington State. It's just wonderful. And the amount of information on it you can get from the internet, our folders, everything else. It's quite a history. 1915 into 16 was the boom, the real boom years for the Rice Brothers. They were just going and going. I'm going to bounce you around between these photographs for a second. Here in this picture is the first shop they built, 1892. 1910, they built this addition. You notice back in 1916, the addition's gone. And then they built this huge building. Okay. Here's George's house. That was all there. Here you see it from the other direction, plus a new mill building as well. So they were going, really getting on. This is inside the smaller building. And look at how many of those racing sailboats are here. Up to 200 mahogany boats, they're all up there. See the portholes, this is one of those cruising boats they're building down here. They had 40 and sometimes up to 50 boats inside there. And that number is important because it's coming. 1916, they also recruited Jacob Stevens. That's Jim Stevens on the wall here, founder of our Historical Society and many other things. That's his father. He was a naval architect at Bath Iron Works, and he was recruited because he knew how to design steel hulls. And the prize was to win the contract to build a steel hull lightship to go to Wisconsin, Lake Michigan, and everything was going great. They were working away, building this. They got several men, including the foreman of that as well. So they built their team that way. And they were going well. They had it about 1/3 of the way complete. And disaster. The fire of 1917. The whole place burns to the ground. But take a look at the cartoon. George's house, gone. Mechanical shop, gone. This shop, gone. The new big white shop with a ship in it, look at that, gone. Everything gone. Okay. The good news here is they had already, having moved those other buildings, put in the foundations and the steel frame for the new yard of the future. That's going to have 250-foot boats being built at the same time. So these two sketches, this is the plan of how you run your shipyard. So it's hard to see from back there, but it shows the 5 different, 2 outside, 2 inside the big building, and then another one in this alleyway. Easier to see. This is what they call an insurance map. Shows all the buildings like a survey. And so the yellow building is naturally this building. The thing that looks like a Boy Scout flashlight, that's all those sheds from the riverboat or steamboat. They built a second floor on them and used them for storage and other things. And then that created an alley. And in this 1918 photo, you can see the whole thing as it's done. Looking way over to the left where the fire was, you see the building, you see the sheds now are 2-story. See the alleyway, you see the ship in there. That's the lightship being moved in 1918. And a fun part of this photo is look way over on the right, it's a pre-masted schooner. That's the John Alden design. Priscilla Alden, that's the last big deal of the Adams shipwreck. They built a couple of vessels after that, about 1920. The other thing that Jacob Stevens was able to do is to give them the ability to design, so they could win contracts with the fishing industry to build 6 139-foot pole-driven steel dragons. These were replacing schooners. And here are the first 2 that are launched, very successful. Off they go, the Alden Mills and Lewis Winslow. You can see another one that started outside. This is one of the new buildings they had built the previous year, built building. The following year, sorry for the order of the photos, this is the lightship being built in the alleyway from the inside. There, far side, she's been launched. She's right next to number 3 and number 4 of the fishing trawlers. So everything was really going well. Here's the lightship just before she's sent away. Then, after World War One, not surprisingly, there's a rolling recession in the country. And at one point, it finally gets to the fishing industry of New England, and they're decimated and all contracts are canceled. So now what do you do? You've got these two partially built hulls, you're totally invested in them. So they spent a year and they were successful taking the first one, refitting it into a passenger vessel. They called it Bainbridge. The second one sat 4 years. Finally, in 1925, they got a contract to complete it as a fishing trawler. They called it, here's being launched. That was called the Harbor. So, what was Bainbridge's story? Off she goes to Chicago. She used to go across the river, the lake, Benton, Michigan, and back and forth. She did that for up until 1936. Then she went to Mackinac Island, way up at the top of Michigan. He was there for a long, long time, 1960. And then the newspaper picture over there, she's in Cleveland, Ohio. She's been rebuilt, renamed the Queen of Lake Erie, where she lasted as a recreational boat for 5 years before she became a restaurant. The harbor. This was most of my last winter, to get into understanding, learning about these trawlers, how do they work, everything else. That's why I built the model that's over here in the corner and studying it. This image from the internet is the only one we can find of Harvard as a fishing vessel. We don't know when it was taken, probably later in its life. It fished all the way to World War II. Navy then took her, assigned her to the Coast Guard. It wasn't really the Coast Guard yet, but we had a small division protecting Greenland. It was supposed to go up there, except some genius decided to cut it at 30 feet to the length of the hull, put all those guns up the bow. Didn't do very well, sea trials. So they never actually went to Greenland. The war ends. She's refit totally again. And there she is, 1946, leaving Boston. In those days, they called it the U.S. Fisheries out of Woods Hole. Today it's NOAA. So she became the NOAA Albatross 2. They since had an Albatross 3 and so forth. But she was there until 1956. And then she was sold out and went into the fleet of Nantucket ferry boats and whatnot to act as a small ferry, small freighter. But she had quite a life. So what else is going on? Well, John Alden, you know, the famous designer, schooners especially. He designed 2 schooners. This one's called Break Rock, the other's Blue Water. This one won multiple races, was sold, painted black, and renamed Bagheera. Bagheera is the Black Panther in the jungle. She went to the Mediterranean. She went to Chicago. She went to California. She won all kinds of races through her whole life. In 2002, think about it, 80 years later, the family that run the day sailing down in Portland, Maine, brought her back. 2010, she was brought to East Boothbay, all David Stinson, you know, up on the River Road, used to build schooners and things up there. He worked at Samples mostly, but he was up there. He refit her. And Lee and I went down to Portland last year to try to sail on her. And I've since learned you can't unless you want to charter her for $1,000 an hour, which wasn't in my vocabulary. So anyway, we got lots of lovely pictures of her, and she's celebrating her 100th birthday this year. Prohibition. Well, Maine was a big deal in the Prohibition story. I bet there's a lot of stuff here that somebody's interested, they could find out about. It's random. What do the fishing schooners do that are out of business? Sail up to Canada, get yourself a load of booze. So the Coast Guard said, we need a whole bunch of patrol boats that can catch schooners. So Rice Brothers was the right place to go, and they built 10 of these. They did 22 knots, and off they went to chase these poor guys trying to make a living selling whiskey. I'm not prejudiced. The fishermen. Yes. All right, 1926 to 1932. Now that number 600 we're going to talk about in a second. Henry's back into his production only in bigger. But there's also a new phenomenon with the cottages being built everywhere by this time in life. There's an upper middle class now that's evolving, and they all want these boats. And so they started making bigger ones with inboards and smaller ones without boards. This is the 1928 Rice Brothers truck getting ready, and the captain had said to deliver this boat to Marblehead. Well, there's a guy on the internet who studies all shipyards in America who says they built over 700 of these during this period of time. I have a note from Robert talking about 200 in a period of time. So I'll put a footnote somewhere, but there's a lot of them. 600, and there's a lot of them they build over 6 years. To say they built 100 a year is magical. So, but that's basically what their business was during that period of time. 1930s weren't good for anybody. Everybody knows that. Many shipyards that built yachts just said, we're not building yachts. Rice Brothers didn't do that. They built one here, one there. They actually sold more racing sailboats, 10 of them. See up there, the dark harbors that are sending up to Northeast Harbor Yacht Club. Take the contract to take the Islesboro ferry boat, cut it in half, add 30 feet to it, so it could take more cars. They built a 100-foot long fireboat for the city of Portland. In 1939, they got a duplicate contract to build the same thing again to send to Vladivostok, Russia. They built 98-foot tugboat, Tacoma Boy, which is, they had a lot of fun with it because the millwork, all the woodwork paneling and whatnot, they paneled the crew's quarters. They did everything on it. There's all kinds of jokes about it. But sadly, she was lost going to Newfoundland during World War II. As to you, enter Geared Hendel, very interesting guy, German engineer, expert in aluminum. He's recruited by Starling Burgess to go to Bath Iron Works. They were building Ranger, the J-boat that won the 1937 America's Cup. They summered, both of them, Starling and Geared, in Boothbay Harbor. They were very active in the local racing scene. Starling convinced Geared to enter the design contest for the Boothbay Harbor Yacht Club, design the 21-foot one design for the yacht club. And he won that design, so that's what it is today. Look at Boothbay Harbor one design. Well, back to our story, you got Henry. Henry was in the metal, he was machining. Let's build 35-foot, all aluminum cruising boat called Whistler. And the photograph's not what you think. But Robert told me they got the paint on, top side and bottom. Hopefully the engine's not aboard. They're going to dunk it in the harbor. I don't know how long, but to test what does salt water do to aluminum, paint, blah, 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 blah. Well, obviously it passed its test because it's still alive. It's still in Rockland. That's what Geared Hendel moved after the war. But that's an interesting story. There's not a lot of aluminum cruise boats, but the fact that they could build it, it's just another example of technology. Here's a wonderful picture of the crew. And Robert told me this is very typical. It's 38, something like that in the picture. He said they went low 22, high 45 was the average all the way through, except for World War II. There were well over 200 people. And there you go. So some of your friendly neighbors. Who's the lady? I don't know, but I bet she wrote your paycheck. So you were nice to her. 1938, they got another contract, 37 actually, launched in 38, for another lightship for the Coast Guard. And this is interesting because two things are happening. One is they name a lightship for the reef that it's protecting you from the reef. So the name of the reef is Cornfield, that's in Connecticut. Coast Guard was decommissioning, so they were able to build more durable buoys, things like that. They don't need a lightship. So after 10 or 15 years, it's decommissioned. It moved to spelled Crossrip, it was in Martha's Vineyard, and then it was actually to Boston. 1973, done. No more lightship. At the mouth of the Delaware River, they have a lightship called Overfalls, and it was decommissioned as well. You're going to see the funny part of the story in a few minutes. The group in Lou's Delaware is where the Cape May Ferry goes. They built a museum there. They bought this one from Boston, from the Coast Guard, refitted it out, and that's the museum today. So Lee and I were there last Thanksgiving, and it just confirmed their technology had evolved. It's 100% welded hull. All the top sides is still all riveted plate, but they had just moved along with the industry. It's good to see. World War II in one slide. That's because there's so much to talk about the whole town. I mean, they were very respectable. So first off, they built these two sub chasers. They're 115 feet long. Then they got a contract for 5 of these. They're 126 foot long. Minesweepers. Interesting fact, Robert told me that wheelhouse is made of bronze. Yeah, they don't want metal. This is the last contract, you see 303. They got another contract for 6 more, so they built 13 altogether. And it was just quite a story. So I think should be told about all the shipyards together. So the war ends. And for those of us that are baby boomers, the middle class just exploded. Everybody wanted to vote. I remember when my dad had a 14-foot plywood skimmer with like 12 horsepower Evernote on, how proud he was we could go fishing. We had a 27-foot horrible sailboat as well, but Henry knew this, and he said, "We're going to build aluminum, maintenance free." Maybe less maintenance, but he's standing behind his invention. That's a combination. The centerboard goes up and down, a dagger board goes down, but he made a rotating dagger board. He patented that thing. And you can put it in a canoe, or you can put it in a small boat like that. They see the motor. Look at this inboard motor, size of your lawnmower in a canoe. They built 1,600 of these in those 6 years. How about that? After the war, America changed. I mean, it wasn't just the evolution of the middle class. Everybody wanted to celebrate their industry. So the fishing industry, you see clam bake, the maritime industry, you see all the salesmen showing their wares, and the town had parades and everything else. And apparently, as you go through our files back in here, and you know, Kay and everybody says, yes, the 1947 Fisherman's Fair was a big deal in this town. In 1948, they did it again. And you see the Navy even dispatched a minesweeper. So they brought it into Rice Brothers so that everybody could climb all over it. You got a carnival. And this is all the way down School Street now. So it was quite a big deal. 1950, the Coast Guard went out with 4 more lightships. Rice Brothers won the contract for 2 of them. So they were built 30 days apart. And they were launched. And I show you the pictures of overall falls with all the water, because Robert told me that was the year that he was actually working in the yard. He worked in the yard 1 year, said this was not for me, joined the army. But see the waves? He said that crew, when they came in off those trials, were so sick, they said, "Where do I sign?" Columbia was 30 days later, these launch pictures. But more importantly, what happened to them? Well, Columbia had a pretty normal life. She went to the Columbia River. She was there. 30 years later, she's decommissioned. They have a museum in Astoria, so they do fundraisers and they rehab her. And she's there. Go take a look. Overfalls. This story is interesting. That's why I built the model of that one. You learn so much about a vessel and build them up. I knew nothing about lightships. I don't know that much more now, but it's kind of interesting. But he went to the mouth of the Delaware River, is decommissioned, sent to California, and ultimately becomes what they call relief. That's the vessel that goes to substitute when they need substitute. And at the end of that assignment here, this is a Google image I took on. That's her today. It's the San Francisco Maritime Museum.
Can you say again, why was a life, what is the life that function.
They really didn't have radio beams and all the technology inside a buoy in the day. So if they take 100-foot ship, tall masts, and lights, they put it at the mouth of Boston Harbor, or they put it on a major reef to keep you from running into the north end of Nantucket Island. And I say the Nantucket Island because you all know the Titanic. The Titanic had a sister ship. She ran right into the Nantucket lightship and cut it in half, and wasn't a pretty picture. One of the reasons why they wanted to replace it. But now the buoys have so many electronic things going on. It's all automatic, but back in the day, it was, no, let's put a light ship out there with big lights on it and foghorns. Yeah, these big things on the top of the light ship, those are huge foghorns. Every story has an ending. Not every story, but this story has an ending. And what was going on around town? 1953, Hodgdon's next door burned to the ground. And Sonny rebuilt in 1954. So what you see today when you go down, that's what Sonny rebuilt in 1954. The metal buildings came a few years later. It's all marina now, but that's what it was. 1954, Hurricane Edna came and wiped out the outer side of Rice Brothers. They were in the middle contract for 11 of these personnel boats. These are Navy boats. See the big hook? Goes on an aircraft carrier. So when they are at port or their fleet's out and they want to move people between ships, takes it out, drops it down. They had about 7 of them done. Storm came. That really wasn't the nail. The Navy had decided that during World War II, all the shipyards in America paid too much money. So they had the equivalent of a class action suit backwards. But they were going to go back to all the shipyards and assess money. Obviously, it went to the courts, but it went all the way through the courts. The Supreme Court said the Navy wins. So imagine you're in a contract for these things, and the Navy shows up one day and says, "Oh, by the way, thank you for building the ships. We're just not going to pay for it." It's not a real good way to run a shipyard. So it's important now to understand what happened to our founding brothers, right? So it's 1942. Will buys the shipyard. His son Ted, actually, years after the war, Ted is not only running mill, he's also working. 1946, Will says, "I want to be bought out." So World War II was over. He said, "I had enough." So they bought him out. Off he goes to retirement. Henry was less active. Baxter, his son, was basically running the place, but Henry was still alive. So when the Navy came in and did this, Henry said, "That's it, done." And Baxter said, "I'm not going to do anything my father doesn't want." And as Robert explained to me, Baxter went to work with Paul Luke and had a wonderful 17-year run back with Paul Luke's. So it all worked out well for the family. And went into receivership. And there's about 5 years of this rolling, what's going on. Last thing Robert told me was like in 1957, damage came over and rented the space for 6 months. Lots of things were going on. And then around 1960, this guy, Walter Rather, who comes up from Texas, lots of money, says, "Baxter, I want you to run this thing. I'm going to buy it from the bank." I think he bought it from the bank, but Baxter wasn't going to change his mind. Bernard had taken over Frank's, his father's lumber yard and hardware and all that sort of stuff. And he was partnered with a guy called John Gordon. They were basically friends there. That wasn't the business. But they ended up buying the plant from Raster, but never really got it going. But in comes our hero, the son of the Fuller Brush man. Okay, he says, "I want to buy a shipyard." So Alfred Fuller comes to town in 1963, and in December they sign it. They buy the place, and they spend 6 months making major improvements. He poured lots of concrete. He actually closed in that alleyway, and he set up to build both wooden. This is a wooden dragger, and they also had the ability to work in steel. They had a good run. They ran up to 1968.
Is any relation to the original Fuller?
He's the son of the founder of the Fuller Brush Company. Nothing to do with Fuller Cream.
Not Jacob Fuller.
Nothing, no. They came out of Ohio. Or something. I just went below it, sorry. Enter Neil Tillotson. Wow, we could spend a half an hour talking about him. This is our world celebrity comes to Boothbay. This guy in today's money is a billionaire. He was a multimillionaire. He invented all kinds of latex and rubber and had rubber plantations, factories, all in New Hampshire. I showed this picture of him. He's the guy that created Dick's Fuel Notch. I'm the guy that votes first for president of the United States. That's 1960. He voted until 2002. He was 2000. He was 102 years old. And he was still the first American to vote for president. 1 minute after midnight. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, why does he come here? He's into rubber and chemicals and everything. He wants to build fancy yachts out of fiberglass. Okay. So he goes to John Alden. And many times John Alden has told these guys from the Boothbay. And he did it again. Go see some. So this is a 47. They built John Alden 47s and John Alden 58s. So they first went to Sonny Hodgson in that building that you see today. And they built a plug. Many of you know what a plug is. They built a plug for the fiberglass. Sonny said, as soon as that plug is done, I'm out. Because he didn't want to work in fiberglass. And there was a lot of stuff, people who did or didn't want to work in fiberglass. Okay. So 1966, 65, he actually buys Sonny's shop. Money's no problem. And after a while, he wants to build more and more. And there's an empty shop right over there, the old Rice Brothers, the old Fuller. And so he says, well, let's go over there. And so he hires this guy, Jim Stevens. You be my superintendent over the old Rice Brothers plant. We're going to build 58-foot fiberglass docks. Okay. And everything is rolling along. Two things happen around 1975, 1976. Okay. First of all, there's a new character. His name is Gamage, Bertie Gamage. He's of the family of South Bristol, but not of their business. He has his own business. And he's at Samples down in Boothbay Harbor. The part of Samples is where the marina is today. He's out there. Look at the ship. He's got a pretty big ship. Built two of them. Frank Sample dies, 76, 77. And the family that buys his yard says they want to sell this piece. They don't want the whole yard. So Gamage needs a new place. What does he do? That same year, Tillotson meets a guy called Everett Pearson. Ever heard of Pearson Yachts? Tillotson Pearson became the company that is one of America's biggest yacht building out of Rhode Island. So his interest quickly moves to Rhode Island and things slow down in Berkeley. So that is Edward Gamage. This is Joel Stevens. This is the next generation, third generation Stevens. He and Gamage partner up and they create the Gamage and Stevens, and they have a good run. They run all the way to 1983. And they build all kinds of things. And just a funny thing, this is a 160-foot pleasure craft that the Tillotson company from Cayman Islands buys and sends up to, that's the old Rice Brothers building, sends it up for them to refit it out to be an island freighter. That's the kind of work they did. Sometime around 1985, I think you see the end of the story is coming pretty quickly here. Washburn and Dowdy want to move off the Kennebec River, and this plant's available, and they make a deal that has been wonderful for the town. They're still very successful, and they built a lot of those tugboats. Over in the Frank Rice area, I'm not positive on the dates here, so I say 80s. There were auctions, there was demolition of the buildings, there was property bought and sold and back and forth, and eventually the town of Boothbay ends up buying it, and it's the shipyard park today. So the sources of all of this and everything that Robert has so nicely donated so much of his previous work. I mean, he used to be president of this organization, and you go back there, there's so much stuff that he has his fingerprints on. But these two models of the World War II vessels that he built, and the light ship are down there. And these volumes over here, there are 20 of them, some of them are out. They take you through the complete history of the Rice Brothers, but they also focus on World War II in Maine and other things. It's just wonderful. So thank you all very much.